All right. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us this evening, or evening where I am anyway. I understand it's far from evening in other locations, for what is perhaps, I think, possibly the seventh workshop we've had within this restorative justice pedagogy group. And this one is on participatory and experiential learning in restorative education. So the logic for a session on this topic was that pedagogically, there's burgeoning a field of research around how to develop participatory and experiential approaches within higher education. But of course, those are things that are particularly important to us in restorative justice and restorative practices, where we, strongly advocate for stakeholder participation in the services that they participate in, that they seek, that they could even help to co-design and so on. And so it seems particularly apt, I think, to have a topic on this subject for this network. So I can see we've got about just under 30 people here from at least 10 or so countries. So that's really, really good. We've just got a few minutes to check in. So what I'd like to ask everyone to do, if you can check in the chat function, just tell us what you're having for your dinner today, or maybe you had something really good for dinner yesterday or for lunch, but tell us about a good meal that is forthcoming or recent for you. And also just take a minute or two and type something in the chat in as few words as possible. What do you do to create opportunities for participation and engagement in your higher education teaching? So tell us about something that you do to create opportunities for participation and engagement in your higher education teaching, as well as a delicious meal, please, to make us all super hungry. See some pretty good meals coming in here. And we'll save the chat. Not to count your calories or anything, but for the other question around participation engagement. All right, Lindsay, Alana, or Rowan, would you guys like to come in on some of these interesting participation engagement points in the chat here?
Yeah, I'm seeing lots of circles, which is one of our topics for today, and different ways of creating space for dialogue, which I think is probably the end goal. And oh, thanks, Annie. Yeah, games for me too. But it's exciting, and I just want to say, by way of saying hello to everyone and so many people on this call that I so value and admire, that these conversations have been such a source of inspiration, I know, for me in my own teaching. And this semester especially, I'm teaching a class called Teaching Restorative Justice, and so I'm drawing on these conversations with you all quite a bit in talking about restorative pedagogy with the class and doing different activities. So just expressing gratitude, in addition to reflecting on some of these great ideas that we'll get to dive into today.
Thanks, Lindsay. And I'm seeing some really interesting ones coming through here from one of our speakers, in fact. So we're going to start with Annie O'Shaughnessy, coming to us from the Graduate Education Department at St. Michael's College, who's going to speak to the topic of mindfulness and compassionate curiosity in restorative classrooms. So Annie will speak for about 20 minutes or so, and we'll have 10 minutes also for discussion there. And then immediately after, we'll hear from Mohammed Asadullah, who's coming to us from the University of Regina Department of Justice Studies. And he's going to speak about using Lego for experiential learning in restorative classrooms. So I'm really, really looking forward to these, and so grateful to Annie and to Mohammed for joining us today and for sharing some of their teaching practices with us. So yeah, all good. Other co-organizers feeling happy, feeling good here. Some good things coming in the chat. So without further ado, then I will pass it over to Annie, who hopefully, if I've set this right, you should be able to share your screen. So take
Mhm.
it away.
All right. Um, Full disclosure, I'm surprisingly nervous, and that's a really great sign. I care so much about this, and I also care about your time. So I'm really hoping that what I have to offer is relevant in some way to you. It's going to be a pretty serious mind dump. I'm not used to just dumping, but I did it this time, and please don't try to take everything in, but just see what resonates with you and what questions you have. So the first thing that I got to do right now, because I'm nervous, and the first thing that I teach in my restorative classes to educators who want to practice restorative in schools is the 2 feet, 1 breath. And this is really the basis of the work. And so I call it a technique for bringing our best self to every interaction we have and every task we attempt to accomplish. It decreases mistakes, misunderstandings, and lost phones. So I just ask you to join me if you want to practice this with me. And the first thing is just to stop what you're doing and find your 2 feet. And with a big in breath, you're going to bring some kindness to yourself and check in on yourself. And on the exhale, you're going to let go of what you think you know. So my whole approach really had its roots in therapeutic school I worked at, where I would enter in a classroom to meet a new student who had a history in his file that I just read of hitting teachers or throwing desks, and I had to do this practice because what I noticed was if I didn't, I had a much harder time with the student. But if I got grounded, I did a lot better. So that was like the beginning of my own little laboratory. And as you'll see from my presentation, I'm always creating new laboratories to test the impact of mindfulness on our work. So my opening quote today is from Kay Pranis. Working in restorative justice is a layered experience. As practitioners, we talk a lot about the values of restorative justice and the importance of those values in guiding our practice. Parallel to the external work, many of us find ourselves on a journey of internal work of healing and repair and internal reflection on applying the values in our own lives. So I am deeply interested in the impact of our inner life on the work that we do. And this is for the people who can just flash through this. This is my journey here. So you can see in there, circle keeper, therapeutic school, reluctant meditator, high school educator, neuroscience devotee, brain injury survivor, late master's, college instructor, certificate program, and consultants. It's really kind of the long track to how I got here, quickly said. And that's me down there in a classroom with my students. So I'm hoping my contribution is consisting today of a short story or two, reflections on the inner journey, and then how to incorporate mindfulness in the rhythm of instruction to build the skills of a restorative practitioner. So the first piece of the work that I try to work with my students in my class, my students being the educators who are wanting to learn this, is this. There's a lot of discussion and conflict resolution about being bias-free. That, however, is an illusion. It is not possible to be bias-free. The thing to aim for is being bias aware, so we can correct for our biases with balancing strategies. We cannot be bias aware without going inside, paying attention to our thoughts and feelings, and striving to be honest with ourselves. That is difficult internal work. So the experiential piece of my class is that they really have to do this work in order for me to feel good about them holding panels, facilitating circles. And this was reinforced for me when I was part of an RJ panel. I volunteered at a local panel. Vermont has community RJ in every 20 places all over the state. And it's staffed by volunteers at the panel level. It's run by people in the corrections department on the top. But what happened one night was a very attractive, two women came in about a fight they had, a violent fight. One woman was well-dressed, quite beautiful, smelled nice, was very articulate. The other woman was very rough around the edges, very old clothing, did not smell well, and was really edgy. And I watched through the course of this panel, the panel of volunteers shifting their bodies away from this woman, changing their question of the conference. When they asked the questions of the attractive woman, they kind of changed their questions. And then eventually, as my discomfort grew and grew, I was about to stop the council, and I looked at the woman and she had tears running in her eyes, and then she left. And I went outside and asked her, how are you? And she said, they don't even see me. And these are really good-hearted people, very good-hearted people who are panelists, but they weren't aware of their bias. And so they caused more harm in the situation where this person of privilege and was actually more at fault. The facts were clear. So this is the motivation for my work of including mindfulness in the beginning of every restorative course I do. So that bias piece. And then the three important words, humility and self-compassion. I don't know. Prentice writes, genuinely inviting feedback about possible negative impact of my actions is an ongoing challenge for me. It requires a lot of work on self-empathy and self-love, sitting still and staying present when I want to run and hide. True accountability taking responsibility for our actions is extremely difficult and painful. We cannot ask it of others if we are not working on it in our own lives. So I ask my students to do this work of how do we create a culture in which we can give each other difficult feedback and sit in the fire of that, sometimes really shearing shame, sometimes anger and defense. We use the compass of shame to talk about, like, what's our favorite strategy? We kind of make light of it. It's like we all have a strategy when things get hard. Which one's yours? Do you attack self? Do you attack other? Do you hide? Do you deflect? And so we activate ourselves first purposefully. And transparently, we borrow the practices that Resmaa Menakem beautifully assembled in his book, Grandmother's Hands, where he really talks about this need to be able to, you can have all the skills you want in your restorative facilitation training, but if you do not have the grounded presence and the ability to stay in it with your emotions in check, then it's no use. It's no use. And so that's the inner work that's needed. And then the compassionate curiosity is, for me, was the key. So when I had the brain injury, I started meditating a lot more. It was a fifth concussion in a series, a pretty active life. And what I found was that my meditation was the only thing that helped my symptoms. And then what I found was I was doing better with students from my meditation. And this is something that started a theory for me. I decided to approach St. Mike's about a class called Transforming Teaching and Learning Through Mindfulness and Restorative Practices. And what I decided to do was spend the first 6 weeks teaching mindfulness only. And they're not going to learn anything about restorative approach. My theory was that if in their journals, they would start to write as if they were restorative practitioners. And here's the first one that I ever got. What I notice most is my slowing down with behavior. The result is that curiosity and noticing have time to lean into the situation. What I hear myself saying to kids during my noticings and curiosity is, you're not in trouble. I'm moving more consciously toward a sense of fundamental adequacy than lack and an open, non-judgmental curiosity. When I saw this in the journal that first year, which was about 5 years ago, I just hooted, because it was the proof that my theory that if we developed mindfulness first, that our true nature is naturally compassionate and curious. If we pause and really look at the behavior, we'll kind of cock our head like dogs do, or like, is that kid really the bully that I've labeled him to be? Is that student, just that curiosity. And it's a really exciting time for me because my organization is called True Nature Teaching. And I have always believed that this is work that we're trying to remember how to do, not do for the first time. But these are our roots as human beings, is to collaborate and be curious and compassionate. So this is one I just received last night, actually, which is just so lovely in the middle of this pandemic, how hard teachers are working. When my usually lovely advisory was cranky and arguing about which game to play, I let go and told them I was going to sit back and breathe and think for a minute. I told them that I knew that they would be able to figure it out, but I'd be there to support if it felt impossible. They figured out their problem in about 20 seconds. Normally, I would have felt a low-key panic about our little community falling apart and tried hard to help with lots of words, Heather. So this quote says so much to me about the impact of mindfulness on the development of a restorative practitioner. So remember, they haven't learned anything about restorative practices yet, and yet she's living the principle of everyone has a gift, all gifts are needed. The solution to the problem is right here in this room. I just need to let go. So I haven't even talked about those principles and assumptions yet, and yet they're living them. So again, super excited. And the last one is from Andrea, this emotional capacity. I'm noticing that I have increased capacity to support students' emotional needs. Last week, I was in such a calm, clear-headed space that I was able to respond to students' needs with empathy rather than frustration. And I supported multiple students in restorative conversations that they felt they needed to have before they would be ready to join us for class. It felt great to be there for students in the way that they needed instead of feeling overwhelmed and hopeless, which is where I was at before starting this course. So this one definitely points to, I think, a big challenge among restorative justice practitioners and in schools and out of schools, and that is this fatigue, that the fatigue of caring, and that the restorative approach, mindfully based, helps us with that. I have my own timer on here, so. Oh, one more. This one I love. Rather than defaulting to calling students out for undesired behaviors, I am finding the space in the day to pause and have a one-on-one conversation with them that is able to be focused on their behaviors, choices, and not on them as people. So what I'm trying to do in my course, and what's the experiential aspect of it is, how can we backwards design from the qualities we want in our restorative practitioners? Because I tell you, I've been, no offense to RJ practitioners, but I have found very few that actually know how to receive feedback personally. Like I've had more kind of weird conflicts with RJ practitioners than a lot of people, and I don't know if it's similar, like the way therapists are often people who are trying to work out their own issues. These are cliches, I know. I'm trying not to offend people, but I've been really surprised at their RJ practitioners' inability to actually have a conversation where I'm saying, hey, like I felt a little run over in that meeting there. Well, the defensiveness has been wild. I'm like, wait, I thought we were restorative. I was really surprised. And I think it just all comes down to what Kay Pranis has says over and over, is that as facilitators, we can do incredible good. We can also do incredible harm. We have a lot of power as a circle facilitator, as an RJ facilitator. And if you do not do the inner work, your energy even can impact the outcome of a circle. So it's an incredible responsibility, and to not be practicing these skills as we train them to not be teaching them and practicing the skills in the classroom of grounding and sourcing ourselves and sitting in the heat of a very difficult conversation, receiving feedback, and carrying on with empathy and compassionate curiosity instead. I don't know how to do it. And this piece we're coming to is how my brain is working around this backwards design. So how is mindfulness meditation and mindful awareness able to have this kind of impact on teachers? These people who aspire to be mindfulness practitioners, restorative practitioners, and through their practice, they've developed some skills. So this is going to be a view of my brain. So hang in there with me. But these are the qualities that they've named that they have developed through their practice. And I'm talking about a disciplined meditation practice, 10 to 20 minutes a day. All right, so that's what they've reported they are experiencing. And these are the qualities and experiences that I feel like they're offering out into the world that are impactful to the restorative process. So co-regulation is when my nervous system impacts yours. I'm regulated, you're regulated. And so to me, that leads to a sense of safety. If I am holding a circle and my body is regulated, the room feels safe, things are calm. That leads to trust, which leads to collaborative problem solving. If the facilitator is kind of a little bit unwound, it's pretty hard to come to a place of trust. The next thing is attunement, which goes back to infant's development, where the mother needs to attune to the infant's needs. It's super important for when we are a circle facilitator, we are reading the room. This is kind of like reading the room. If we are defended or not calm or feeling judgmental of what's being said, we're not attuning, we are actually projecting. So attunement creates a sensation of empathy. That empathy is just a tool. Empathy is just a tool. A con man is empathetic. So don't get stuck in empathy. Empathy is the trigger for compassion. And compassion is active and can be fierce. Compassion is what leads us to this non-judgmental curiosity and action. Like, what is actually happening here? Instead of what do we think should happen? And then differentiation is what we do to not get stuck in empathy. When we are facilitating and someone is speaking who is a lot like us, who was just assaulted just like us when we were 10 years old, there's all this connection and resonance between our experience and even triggering between us and the ones who are talking in circle. This is a huge issue, to be able to hear the account of what happened from someone in a council. It triggers our own trauma or experience. And then we are able to differentiate, which is coming back to our breath, coming back to 2 feet, 1 breath, which leads to an objectivity, which leads to clarity and equitable responses. We cannot be equitable in our response if we are sucked into and feeling what others are feeling. Empathy leads to inequities because we are in it with the person, their own subjective reality. And lastly, self-awareness. How can we do this work if we don't have wise discernment around what's my stuff and what's not my stuff? Just like that teacher saying, kids can handle it. Instead of, she was aware that her stuff of having to control and fix was going to get in the way, so she let it go. Wise discernment leads to right action, and right action leads to really transformative justice, where huge change can happen. All right, so winding down, how do we create the conditions for this inner work in the classroom? This book, The Social Neuroscience of Education, and Lois Cozzolino's work in his attachment-based classroom is huge in this work and what I try to create, because how can you do the inner work needed to be a restorative practitioner if you are not learning about restorative practices in a space where there's no trust? And sense of belonging and connection and trust is crucial to building a classroom where we can admit to our biases and work on these practices. And finally, this is the gift from Kay Pranis and the folks she works with from First Nations up in Minnesota, the balance in the process. So where touchy-feely meets neuroscience. It's basically saying if everything we do follows this structure, we will create that community in which we can examine mindfully the hard things about the obstacles for us around being a restorative practitioner. And they just so happen to mimic the 3 R's of what we know about how to work with trauma, is to regulate first, then connect, relate, and then we can reason, so that the brain cannot access reasoning unless we are regulated and feel a sense of belonging. And so what I try to do in every meeting I hold, in every class I offer, we begin with pausing, the opening, the checking in, because what I'm doing is building a space in which people can do the hard work of their inner journey. And I'll just put in the chat the link to Kate Pranis's article, which is a beautiful article about this topic. Whew, did I do it? Okay. I've never done that before. Whew.
1 minute to go as well. Any other final words, Annie?
Just that I'm just so excited that I got this opportunity, because it's heartening to know that to create the conditions for folks to do this mindful practice in their classroom actually gives rise to what is true of humans, that we are naturally curious and naturally compassionate. Is it actually makes our jobs a lot more joyful to see that arise. Imagine I tear up when I see those journal entries. So it's for you too. I just want to make that point. This is for you to stay in the work joyfully.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much for that, Annie. I'm just
Mhm.
saving that link that you sent there. I will circulate that amongst the group as well afterwards.
Great.
Great. Thanks, Annie.
Mhm.
So look, we have some time. Would anyone like to ask Annie a question or offer a reflection or observation on anything that was said there? How are you guys feeling about that? Well, let me ask you this. Who here takes criticism well? Put your hands up if you do take criticism well.
Depends on the criticism.
Depends on who. Yep, that's right.
Alana, you think you take criticism well? Come on, Mike, tell us about that.
Me, Alana? Or
Yeah,
other
yeah,
Alana?
yeah, you had your hand up.
I guess from my initial training was in crisis intervention. And so we got super, they were listening to our calls at the same time that they were, that we were learning on how to help people through, really intense situations. And so it was part of the process that we got direct and ongoing feedback about what we did well and where we need to improve. I mean, these were people's lives, right? So I guess when I'm in a situation that I don't get feedback or I'm getting only positive feedback, I crave that. Okay, but what could I do better? And so it was normalized in my brain before it was even fully formed. This is before I was 25 years old. So I feel like it's sort of in my head that and in my heart that I really am always trying to learn and can learn different strategies. So I do get frustrated when I don't hear that feedback or people give it in a way that is hard to hear. Obviously, there's these people knew how to deliver it in a good way, but that's sort of my roots, and I try to bring that to my practice today. But I agree. I think that it's not just restorative justice practitioners that have a hard time hearing feedback. It's difficult. It's difficult, but we owe it to ourselves and our students, right?
Thanks, Alana. Miguel, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask Annie a question. So thank you so much, Annie. I really love your presentation. So good to hear your quotes of Kate Pranis. I learned circle keeping from her, and she's been a mentor all my life. Just love her very, very much. But my question for you is, could you give us some examples of the mindfulness practices you would use with students? What are some of those practices that you would use typically?
With educator students or my high school students?
Well, I would love to hear about different audiences, if possible.
The educator ones, so the ones who are going to be practitioners in circles and restorative justice conferences, begin with the pause. And I actually I don't let them do anything else but pause and then come back the next week and note how it changed their day. So they have to post the word pause, write it on their hand. And it's quite remarkable how that simple tactic changes their practice. And then we work on sourcing. Sourcing is how in the moment will you source yourself? So we do some guided meditation on that. around a safe space. Like it's kind of like EMDR in a way. I don't know if you know that, but like trauma work where you are sourcing yourself on a place in a feeling state that feels solid, because in schools and in conferences that go awry, wow, like you need to source yourself. So there's some meditations on that as well. And then we work on activating ourselves in conversations, like I said. So we're going to go into breakout rooms and talk about, we're each going to admit to a bias we have, and some harm that was caused by that bias. And then when the moment that you start to feel activated emotionally, because you will, try these 2 practices, and then try to respond again. Like keep talking. It's remarkable how you watch the person get activated and they do the sourcing. And of course, it's all slowed down because in the real life, you're never going to be able to have all that time. But I've learned that you can say some words. I teach them to say, whoa, or wow. When you do a harm or feel a harm, just make some space by saying a word like that, and then do your sourcing, and then respond again. And wow, how remarkable to see their faces and their whole bodies change when they come back from sourcing and say, inevitably they'll say, wow, I just made such a huge error there. I want to hear how that felt to you. And boom, there you go. That's the right response, not found in any book, right? It just comes from the heart. Like, I really messed up, didn't I? I want to hear how I can support you now, because yeah, I feel bad. So thank you for asking that question. It's powerful work.
Thanks, Miguel. Any other questions? I can see Mara has come in on the chat there with a question. Mara says, for teaching, does it make a difference if we're talking about secondary students, college students, or future practitioners? Each of these is a different context. Would you like to come in on that, Annie?
Yeah, the very different levels of capacity. I always think of capacity, skill, and motivation. So you ask an anxious middle schooler to focus on their breath, and they could likely have an anxiety attack, because focusing on your breath when you're an anxious person can really make you more anxious, because you notice how anxious you are. And then the skill, what skill they have previously, and then what kind of motivation they have. So depending on the age, you need to have create buy-in, because it needs to be voluntary. You can't force people to do this work at all. So looking at their capacity, skill, and motivation for each developmental age, and the milieu in which you're working, those are the 3 buckets that I work on before I choose the kind of practice that I'll offer.
Can I follow up with that, Ian? Because
Mhm.
there was a second part of that. And while it's not specifically about bias, there is also sort of this larger context now in which we are exploring these ideas, certainly in the US, certainly in the state where I am. So for example, so many people on this call already know this. One of my jobs is I'm a college professor. One of my jobs is I sit on a local school board. The district where I sit on the school board, there was an enormous fight in one of the high schools yesterday. 10 kids got arrested. There were reputed to be perhaps 100 kids involved. It was a mess. Comments in social media, intentionally targeted at me, so might not have happened if they weren't targeted at me, said, for example, this is what happens when you do restorative justice in schools. This is what happens when discipline isn't strict enough. So there is this. Now, that was directed at me in an election year by detractors. But nonetheless, it's in the current dialogue about why we all know that's not true. But the overlap of social emotional learning, restorative justice, equity practices, all of this is getting very much collapsed in a political environment that makes it harder and harder to both do this work and communicate about this work. So how would you fold that piece in with some of what you're saying? And I might ask the same thing to subsequent presenters as well, because I think I don't know the other presentations, but I think it overlaps a lot.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that that's brought up, because that is right in our faces right now, everywhere we go. So I actually don't have an answer to that, except for that this holistic approach has to get beyond the language that the right is kind of hanging their hat on. They're quickly, co-opting the term restorative to mean this, or critical race theory to mean this. And we have to get, I think, a little more human-centered in the approach, and not, I don't, we should move on, because it is so emergent in my brain right now as I think about the name of my organization even. But yeah, I'm just going to say I affirm that is a huge issue right now, and we have to think very deeply about it. So thank you for raising it.
Thanks, Annie and Mara.
Yep.
Any other final questions then for Annie? Okay. If not,
I put that essay in the chat. Sorry.
Great. Thanks so much for that,
Mhm.
Annie. And thanks for the presentation. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
And look, if anyone thinks of a question they want to ask Annie, feel free to throw it in the chat. We can address it later. And look, now that we've established that mindfulness is part of the culture wars, let's see if Lego is also part of the culture wars. As I turn to Mohammed from the University of Regina to speak for, again, about 20 minutes and then 10 minutes or so of conversation about using Lego for experiential learning in restorative classrooms. So please take it away, Mohammed. You should be able to share your screen if you would like.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Ian, and also Annie. Oh my goodness, such a powerful presence, and the way you shared your wisdom and experience and knowledge with all of us. And I hope you can hear me okay. So my name is Muhammad Asadullah, or I go by Asad, A-S-A-D, because I'm from a specific country, which is my ancestral land, which is Bangladesh. And we have most of our names that start with Muhammad. So my dad and my brother and my uncles, all of their names start with Muhammad. And definitely you're welcome to say Asad or Muhammad, both are perfectly fine. I am joining here from Treaty 4 Nation, which is one of the First Nations here in Canada, Saskatchewan. And I am deeply grateful to one specific elder, Elder Lorna Standing Ready from this nation. When I moved here from British Columbia in 2019, she was so kind to guide me, support me with some wisdom and also insights, and how do I walk in this land with humility. So the word humility was so important in, I guess, in my journey to the field of restorative justice. That really hooked me. Howard Zeher, I was fortunate to study with him at Eastern Mennonite University. So when I think of Howard Zeher, immediately hear the word humility. And that was like that connection that I felt with the word and the way he showed up in class, and also in my own spiritual practice in Islam. There is one scholar from 11th century. His name is Imam Ghazali. He is from Tus area, and he worked a lot on the idea of soul, like Annie mentioned about our inner work. So how do we nurture our soul in a way that will kind of embody the word humility? And for academia, for those, especially for me who are working in the field of academia, there is a lot of focus on our intellect and mind and reason, publications, accomplishments and achievements. Everything reinforces, according to Al-Ghazali, what we call this soul, which is more selfish, self-centered, and really very mean, and they were nothing but me and me and me. And the other soul, which is compassionate and interconnected, relational, transcending. So according to Al-Ghazali, this 11th century scholar, we need to have that balance, and that imbalance, sadly, is injustice. And a lot of times this inner work, what Annie mentioned, contributes that balance. And I was fortunate to study, obviously, with those scholars who, I guess, embody those values. And that really was a real hook. And I'm here in the area of restorative justice because of those, I guess, extraordinary human being that I met, including obviously Kay Pranis that Annie, you mentioned, and Howard Zeher, and I have also my mentor and colleague here as well in this particular gathering. So for me, transitioning to Lego, obviously it's a completely, there is that joyful transition, and Annie, you mentioned the word joy, and if you are fully what we call grounded in your heart or in your body, mind, and soul wholeheartedly, that definitely brings joy, and that contributes joy, and that energy is contagious. that energy is not, that will burn you down, or the idea that compassionate fatigue is, I feel like a lot of time it's a disservice to the word compassion, because compassion itself is not fatigue. It is something that will that should contribute, or that hopefully will contribute a kind of energy that is more joyful, and it's that ripple effect that Brenda Morrison, who is here, I learned this word from her as well. So how it contributes, it's a positive ripple effects. So transitioning to joy, I guess, in my area in the field of teaching, I will share, I have a brief slide, so I'll go to share with you. So I guess in my background, so EMU, I studied at Stern Mennonite University. That was during my study. I still remember some of those practices, like spectrum, conflict spectrum, punishment spectrums, and our professors will take us to different rooms. And obviously my study at Simon Fraser University and doing lots of sessions and spending time with wonderful practitioners in Alternatives to Violence Project in BC. And I'm also a certified NVC trainer. So nonviolent communication, which is Marshall Rosenberg's model from the United States, also had a huge impact. So like everything, what I guess, I feel like teaching is an art. So the way I mean art is like, it's more than skills, more than your knowledge and wisdom. It's like something which you cannot explain. Like there is that magic happen in teaching. So I think that magic is joyful. That magic is something that brings, when you read, as Annie mentioned, you read those reflections from your students, you feel nothing but pure joy. And the tear is a complete sense of pure joy. And when you see one student from week one struggle significantly in talking in circle, and then in their last circle, oh my goodness, he or she, or they're talking and talking and talking, such a wonderful joy. And then from, I guess, week 1 to week 12, you see that in terms of their writings and all those, the worry that they had. So I think that's where I guess restorative justice, in my assumption, is not, or if it is 9 to 5 jobs, then we do disservice to restorative justice, because if you cannot embody those values and principles in your day-to-day life with the people around you, with the loved one, with the significant others, with your siblings, cousins, and relatives and community, then it is very hard to embody 9 to 5, because most of the time you like it. So that's, to me, in that way, teaching can be an art, and Lego can contribute some in that art, obviously, and so many other things. And on of the way, so as I will show some boxes, so I don't know whether you can see it. So these are all Lego in different boxes. So I have like I buy in bulk in kind of random used store, and then I put different pieces into different groups, different box, different what is it called, packets. And this is a pandemic time. Obviously, I think for the first time I will be using Lego next week, because we are doing in-person class next week. I did in July 2019. This fall 2019 semester was the last time I used. So the way, for example, concept of conflict, when I do is I tell them, because this is like the introductory class of restorative justice, I'm trying to deconstruct the idea of conflict. They have this stigma around conflict. They have this, oh, conflict is bad, conflict is problem, conflict. So John Paul Lederach and his work, how do we normalize conflict? How you see conflict as just something which is a part and parcel of your life, and how conflict can be what John Paul called a source of change, so an opportunity for growth. So the way I start is like, what comes to your mind, make something with, like, so all of them will have the same pieces, and they will just make something, whatever comes to their mind in conflict, and they will share. And in almost 99% cases, they will share something very horrible, something horrific with conflict, something which is very challenging. And then obviously I share Neil Christie's article, and then I talk about how conflict can be a source of change from John Paul Lederach. Then I share, like, the world is full of, it will be part of conflict, and as we don't know how to deal with. And then I quote also Judge Barry Stewart from the Yukon Territory, former judge. He called, like, now we have 911 mentality. We don't know how to deal with conflict. We want to delegate this conflict to the law enforcement agencies, to police officers, to the counselors, because we don't know how to do. We have this complete paranoia and anxiety and all those disorders with conflict. So then after those discussions, I asked them again, like, just now what comes to your mind when you think of conflict? And obviously the shapes changes, stories changes. ideas changes. So that's, I guess, a simple way that I start. And then the word justice is also very important in my teaching in restorative justice. So the way there are multiple what we call visions of justice. So state-based, indigenous-led, and restorative justice. So there are 3 visions that I included in my PhD thesis. So I use the same format, and I do the same. What does justice mean to you? So that question led, and they, from this particular Lego set, they try to make something what comes to mind. And a lot of time, the way the textbook that I use for my class is, I will show you. This is the textbook written by Liz Elliott. So in her textbook, this is Security with Care. And in this textbook, Liz Elliott mentioned, sadly, justice and punishment. A lot of time we see there is the nexus. And my students, when they make something with Lego, it's all about punishment. And then that really give me some food for thought. Okay, so you think justice and punishment are same? And then obviously, then that really provoke lots of curiosity. And then I talk about how the idea of justice from a specific worldviews can contribute that notion, and how in different worldviews, including some of the worldviews that I learned from Islamic tradition, the notion of justice, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's the kind of imbalance between your 2 souls. If you can bring that balance between those 2 souls that is inside you, that is the idea of justice. So which is deeply spiritual versus justice as fairness, justice as something that happened between those groups and communities. How do you ensure? So that kind of contributes some resonance. And then obviously after sharing that, I do the same, like, now what is your vision of justice? And then they try to do something with those Lego and then make it. So, and this is, so you can see this is a Play-Doh set. So another one in the class on shame and trauma. I usually have guest speakers where they have personal experience with lots of difficulties and challenges, and they recovered those difficult stories. And I have one guest speaker who himself is so it's a public, he as a public speaker, he's a former gang member, and then his parents were KKK, and he was in like all kind of drug stealing to top gangs you can think of. And then he has this extraordinary, remarkable like transformation. So he shares all those stories, and when he starts talking, I see my students, they feel that agitation. So I give them this Play-Doh and they can play and they can just keep in their hand. Sometimes keeping it, it makes some kind of more tactile touch, and then give them something so they try to use it. And then obviously after sharing, after listening from that guest speaker, I ask them what comes to your mind, and then they sometimes do a group work and they build. So I have another set of Lego, which is there are multiple pieces all. So I tell them that take as much as you like. And these are all, you can see, color coded into different packets. And they will take whatever they like, and they will contribute or make something, whatever make them joyful, or something that really kind of their idea of self-care, something that they can make, they can take any piece from here and then make it. And this is my last, the last idea that I use in my class is community building. So what we do is we give them some instruction. This is what you will build. So they have, like, there are usually 30 students in my class. So and I make 5 to 6 groups, and then usually 5 people, 6 people in each. And then I give them instruction. This is what each group you will make, and they have a written instruction. And then they have also, all of them have specific pieces of Lego. And then after giving the instruction, I tell them, sadly, I have to take your instruction away. So I take all the instruction away, and they have to build the same thing without talking. So they do it without talking. So the idea of collaboration, the idea of like, how do we see that our outcome, whatever comes as a group, is more important than efficiency and productivity, all of it. So, and that build a lot of community connection, and a lot of time our focus on achieving what we call this perfectionist idea, that I have to make whatever I have vision, and then it's exactly has to be like that. So kind of deconstructing that. And restorative justice process is not a copy and pasting model. It is something which is customized culturally, socially, if it is socially, emotionally, culturally responsive to the needs of those particular communities, that is a lot of time more conducive. And then we can obviously avoid what we call this McDonaldization of restorative justice. And that really, a lot of times students, they love it and they feel like that's true. Otherwise it will be only the person who is the talker and the person who is always the leader. His or her ideas will be at the end product, not the like collectively, because a lot of time public speaking is not a cup of tea for many students. And a lot of time those who are articulate, they will take, and many of my international students, they struggle in this particular, I guess, classrooms. So when I remove that piece that you need to build this without talking, that automatically builds some kind of connection. And there is that, I guess, holistic participations from all groups that also contribute some joy in classrooms. That's, I think, all at this moment from my side. And this is my last comment. I used Lego for 3 semesters, and I'm grateful to two specific. One person is one of the amazing practitioners in Vancouver. She does a lot of work with, she's from Black Canadian community. And when she realized that I have some intention and also like genuine interest, she invited me in her house. And then oh my goodness, her whole house is full of Lego. And she was it's very expensive, and I was a graduate student. I cannot buy. So she was so kind to give me, like, take it as much as you like. Her house is full of Lego. And then she said, take as much as you like, Asad, and you don't have to worry when you would like to return. So she was so kind to give me. And then that was the beginning, because if it is expensive, if it is something that you're going, then that's obviously challenging. So I'm grateful to her. And then later on, the teaching in the university, there is also that acceptance. My colleagues, when they come to my classroom, they see that people are playing Lego, they don't take it. What is going on? Are they really learning something, or they're just having fun? So that real learning. I saw my department head. She explicitly mentioned in our departmental meeting that joy is important in teaching, and the way people are sharing and talking. So that affirmation also contributed. If I didn't have that affirmation, if I had colleagues who will come and then whatever, they will listen from my classrooms, and then, oh my goodness, he's not discussing article, he's not discussing peer-reviewed journal articles. Why they're having so much fun? Why? So that, unfortunately, if I had that difficult environment, I don't think that I will be, because affirmation, or I guess inspiration, is very important in my as one of the important needs. So if I didn't have those support from the department, that would have been also contributed. I'm grateful to my department head as well. And lastly, thank you so much, Ian, for inviting me. And this is the first time I'm sharing. I felt some hesitation and some, what is it called? Inner anxiety, like, oh my goodness, these are all big deal restorative justice practitioners from all over the world. And they're and then how, like, in terms of as a rookie restorative justice Lego user, how do I share this with this veteran? And so, but thank you for allowing me, Ian, and thank you so much for listening. And I hope in your class, whatever means you use, I think joyful learning is so important. In my teaching, it really brings lots of emotions, because I still remember that I had difficulties in my high school and primary school, because only it was deeply colonial hierarchical, and a lot of time that's the only way to go, and that harmed a lot, and that brings lots of difficulties in my memory. And seeing that joy that I feel in Circle, I feel safe in Circle, and I think seeing those students thriving is really also healing for me, like my own, like I'm trying to kind of, what is it called, reimagine and rebuild my own childhood difficulties that I had in my high school and primary school. And it's like kind of healing journey for me. So thank you so much. And I guess thank you all for listening, hopefully without judgment, hopefully with curiosity.
Wow, thank you so much for that, Asad. That was fantastic. I mean, what you've both brought us there are very tactile, very physical, very visual, all sorts of things. Like you said, Mohammed, I mean, even sitting in a circle talking about papers is one thing that is participatory and experiential, but it's not so physical, it's not so tactile and so on, as you guys have been talking about. So really, really, really appreciate both of you. And thanks for that, Asad, as well. Any questions? I mean, we had one question that came in the chat there. Do you have any pictures of any Lego creations by any chance, Asad? Do you have some footage you can share with us?
I have it, but it's not in my PowerPoint.
Okay, that's okay.
Some of
Well,
the slides I have in my 2019 class.
well, look, if you and bearing in mind, of course, that you probably don't have permission to share pictures of people. If there are any images that you can send me after that I could share by email with the group, I'm sure that would be fantastic if that were okay.
Completely.
Thank you so much. And Miguel, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Asad. So I'm the director of a family foundation. And at one point we got in contact with the Lego Foundation, and they trained like 10 of our grantees in using Legos for education. And it's been fantastic. So I'm just delighted to hear about your take on using it for teaching about restorative justice, which is awesome. So a couple of questions. One, do you ever run into trouble with people saying, I don't know what to create, or what am I going to do? And the other one is whether in the discussions you use a circle format to get people to talk, or do you just use it, or do you just open it up to whoever wants to speak?
So thank you, Miguel. And I would love to hear more about the training, because as I said, I'm completely rookie and would love to have more training and lesson, and also hopefully some more practice from the veteran like you and also others who are doing. And with regard to the work that I do usually in a small group. So as I said, in my class, I have 30 students. I put them, so in a whole class, there are smaller groups in each, and they're also smaller circles. So it's not the groups, they sit in circle. And as of now, in most of the cases, they build together. So they complement each other. So, and there are some, yeah, no, I don't remember any specific difficulties from any groups that said, I don't know what to make. But sometimes shape changes, like when other groups are sharing, I can see they're adding another layer, another piece, another item. So that shape changes. And then there is one class I did, which is more like 100 level, which is 120 students. So sadly, I didn't have any circle, but what I did, I just randomly put this will be one small group. So you can just move to the other direction from the chair and then face each other and then make it. So that's also feasible with even 120 students, but that in terms of like getting more deeper debriefing or harvesting is challenging, because you only have maybe one of the group members who is sharing whatever they are learning from those. But with, I guess, maximum 30 students and then 5 groups will be ideal. But yeah, I didn't hear any, because it's like completely open-ended. They can make whatever they want. That is something they find it joyful. And then there is no, obviously, all of them will get full participation point. I told them that as long as you're here, that's it. That will guarantee 2 points.
Great, thanks for that, Asad. Any other questions? Or let me ask this then. I noticed, I was just scrolling back through the things that people put in the chat initially, and a few people said role plays, a few people said games. I wonder, does anyone do anything here that involves people physically moving around the room that they'd like to tell us about? Catherine, I can see you nodding. Do you what do you do, Catherine? I'm just conscious that's one thing we're kind of, we haven't quite touched on yet.
Well, I'm thinking of Mohammed's thing of conflict. One of the things that I do, just an example, is maybe asking, this notion of conflict when people are starting off in a class, of conflict is bad or conflict is so. And I learned this from Patty, whom you know, and I'm sure she learned it from somewhere else. So this is stolen from someone, but you put a big load of stuff in the middle of a big room. So say you have a class of 20 something people and all sitting around in a circle, and you get them to move their circle. So there's actually, what I would have them do is when they come into the room, there is a big mess in the middle of the room. Like it could be a couple of chairs piled on top of each other and whatever you can find, a few boxes and a few whatever. And then you just say to people, okay, this is conflict. Where are you in relation to this? You know, where are you going to stand? And people will stand someplace, you know, some people will go over to the door, other people will go right up to it or whatever. And you have a conversation about that. And you say, well, okay, so this is conflict in your house, in your home, you know, what's that like, you know, and so you just end up having discussions about that. And then it's conflict in work or conflict in the university, or, you know, and you end up having discussions about that and about how, you know, how we view it and has it ever brought anything good. But you get people to move around the room in different, yeah, that's one thing.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Miguel, your hand's up. Do you want to come back in on that?
Yes, so my friend Martin Porto here in Costa Rica teaches restorative theater. So he combines restorative justice and restorative practices with theater. And so he taught me that when we're teaching the social discipline window, a really cool exercise is to get people into pairs. And then you tell them, okay, in each pair, you're going to have a teacher and a student. And the student is going to present a situation to the teacher. I didn't do my homework because the dog ate my notebook, spilled coffee on my computer, whatever it is. And in the first instance, the teacher is going to act in a punitive way, only limits, no support, okay? And so they do that. And then I ring a little bell and then we say, okay, students, how did you feel? Teachers, how did you feel? So it's really cool. And then after that, we say, okay, we're going to do the very same exercise, but now teachers, you're going to be restorative. So the very same situation, the very same person, but teachers, you're going to be restorative. And I tell them, but be careful. You don't want to go into being permissive, okay? There has to be both control and support. Okay, go for it. So people in pairs start talking and then you debrief and you can see how people felt awful in the first instance, and in the second instance, like, wow, I was finally listened to, I felt cared for.
Again, so thank you so much again to Annie and Assad for sharing these incredible approaches. I know I was taking just a million notes as you were speaking, and I'm excited to get into the classroom and try out more mindfulness activities and more Lego. And you both spoke so beautifully about the reasons why these are such powerful approaches too, and what you've seen in your classes. So just appreciation for that. And also wanting to just again issue this open invitation to anyone else who has a specific approach or something that they'd like to share in more depth in kind of a similar model. We've been kind of coming up with the next workshop topic as we go, based in large part on, you know, what people suggest or things we've heard about that sound cool that we want to learn more about. So if anyone's willing to share, I know I'm personally so appreciating the chance to just take a deeper dive into different approaches. But what we thought we could do now for the rest of this time is we wanted to do a collaborative design process with everyone here to generate a resource on using circles in higher education classrooms. So when we asked that question at the very beginning in the chat about what sort of strategies you use for engagement, I think circles was probably the answer that came up most. And I know that this group of people has you know, a lot of different ways that you're using circles in the classroom, whether it's for relationship building or to take a deeper dive into content. We've already discussed a few ways of using circle already in our time together. And our thinking was that this could be an opportunity for us all to learn from each other. Oh, Ian is back, I think. Great. So Ian, I'll just finish my sentence and then I'll
Yeah, sorry, keep going. Sorry,
no, it's great.
my web died.
That's good. I already gave them the warning that I was really nervous about note taking for spelling. So I'm so glad you're back to run this.
Oh yeah, thanks.
So I was just mentioning that we were hoping this would be a chance both to learn from each other about some of these different applications and strategies for circle, but then also we would be generating a resource for others who are teaching in higher education contexts and are considering implementing or expanding use of circles in the classroom. And so Ian has some slides that he'll be sharing and be typing into live as we go through this process of kind of co-designing together an introduction to using circles in the higher education classroom, how you use them, etc. To what end. Anything you'd add, Alana or Ian, since you're rejoined?
I don't know. I'm sure you covered it all. Go on, Alana.
I was just going to say the only other thing, just for some context about what we were thinking in sort of this initial planning of this, we did actually originally have sort of an outline within this to talk about, and then felt like, you know, it's really in the essence of what we're trying to talk about, that it needs to be designed as an inclusive process. And so we sort of scrapped what was in and just left these intentionally as something that we do collectively together to share as a resource. So just wanted to give a little bit of context about this process and why we sort of landed here.
Yeah, definitely. So just to, and this was, you already kind of talked about this stuff, right, Lindsay? Or should I go through this again quickly?
I did talk about that kind of purpose. Yeah.
Okay, great, excellent. So yeah, look, you guys facilitate, I'll just type away. But as Lindsay said, we'll just go through the slides. Maybe I'll introduce them all so you know what's coming, and then we can go back to the top. And, you know, everyone just come in and tell us what you want to be on these slides. So we've got, what is a circle? Why use circles in higher education teaching? Applications of circles in higher ed classrooms, or the kind of purposes that circles can be used for. How to design circle questions. Advice for facilitators. Setting circle guidelines, and additional resources. So we're not even wedded to this limited structure that we have, I don't think. Feel free to suggest, you know, different orders, different titles, and so on. But as I'm sure you just kind of established while I was gone, apologies for that. There's a storm here. We knocked out the web for a minute there. But, you know, what we're trying to do is that we'll edit this when we're done and record ourselves doing a video that will be published to help other people who might be interested in doing this. So is that okay? Does anyone have any questions, maybe, first of all, about the activity? Everyone kind of happy enough? I can pop open the chat here so I can see that as well. Okay. So Lindsay, are you starting?
Sure. And I think we had one question for the chat just to like prime the pump a little bit on the last slide, which is just everyone,
oh, yes.
Many folks mentioned using circles. What are you using them for? And if you can share in the chat one or two things that you're using circles for in the classroom, just to get as a starting point, a range of applications.
Or even feel free to come on the mic, I suppose. There's not a huge number of people here if you want to come on. So, okay, as people are coming in here, maybe I'll even go to the applications.
Yep, so I'm
reading some of these. So first is kind of introductions, first class introductions, to discuss course material and readings, create a more horizontal environment, community building, creating a safe container for learning, discussing content circles and proactive relationship building circles, setting classroom norms, increase engagement, icebreakers, circles as creating intentional community where we can all connect with each other, change the feeling from the usual law school class, trained for learning. Circles can be used all the time. Convey that faculty member is a co-learner. Providing opportunities to connect personally with the content. Creating decolonized classroom setting. Experiential learning. If we're talking why circles can also learn by doing, also walking the talk. The restorative classroom idea. Basic tools for instruction. Part of RJ training and RJ mediation course, but also helps build trust, awareness, respect among students. Increase healthy risk-taking. Encourage all to be equal participants and responsible for all. Feel free to jump in, Lindsay. I'm just realizing there are 16 more to go. This is great.
Such a good list. Yeah, I think it was Catherine at one point who said all the time for everything, and it's starting to take shape. So I love this list. Ooh, celebration. I like that. Undermining bias and assumptions. Facilitate dialogue and enhance a safe environment for opinion exchange. Absolutely. This is such a great list, and I know I personally feel appreciative because I'm noticing a couple that I haven't tried yet. But also I think oftentimes people learn circle practice with relationship building questions, and so having this more expansive list of application is just really wonderful. For mourning.
And also as a practice to rethink governance.
Very cool.
I'm trying to group these to rethink governance. I've got experiential somewhere, I think, don't I? That kind of is in that. Oh, yeah.
I wonder if governance in that context means more along the lines, and Brenda, feel free to hop in. My reading that means more sort of in the structure, in sort of deconstructing power dynamics of justice.
So not governance as like governing the classroom.
Right, yeah.
Like,
Brenda had mentioned this in the context of a course on governance, justice, in Indian residential schools.
okay.
Circles explicitly to address the pandemic to deal with students' difficulties and diseases. That's interesting. This is a great list.
It's interesting because it kind of it definitely intersects with the why.
As
It's kind of overlaps in so many ways.
absolutely.
So as sort of the second part of this, that we also really wanted to make sure we capture, and again, this may come into play at some point later, but curious what your thoughts are, or how you introduce, if you introduce within classrooms, is there a limitation to what, or how do you caution what you are not preparing students for in the use of circles? Or are there any sort of limitations or boundaries that you are drawing distinction to say what is the purposes in these classrooms and what potentially other uses are that are not appropriate in that space? Let me know if that makes sense or would be helpful to reword.
Maybe reword, please, Alana.
Okay, so so this came up, I would just say in the context of our discussion, we added this line about caution because it felt important. And this goes back to sort of that initial question about what is a circle and how do you describe that? Do you in any way in the classroom feel that there are times that you express a caution to what circle may not be appropriate to use for in that context?
Like for an extreme example, you would never ask a circle question, tell us about a time when you were a victim of sexual abuse, right? That's exactly the kind of thing that would be like substantively potentially relevant to the content and would be experiential and about connecting personally, but you would never advise someone to use that as a circle question. So I mean, where is that boundary? You know, obviously that's quite an obvious one, I suppose, but that's kind of what you're talking about, right, Alana? Like, where is that boundary for what can you and can you not do with this?
Can I offer something?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, everyone just feel free to come
Okay.
in.
I'm, this is a huge topic for me in schools, and especially in, say, high schools. So the boundaries of the circle and the lack of boundaries of circles impact other teachers, impact other spaces. So if you have you're really good at leading circles and you have a deep circle, kids are dysregulated leaving from it because they got emotional, like that you have a responsibility to the next teacher. Like what are you actually doing? So that's like the motivation. What's your intention? So it's so contextual. Like I never did anything more in my English classroom than, what's your favorite color? Because I just wanted to build connectedness, and that's still a circle and we still have the centerpiece, but it was powerfully important for that context. And it was really important. I did not dig any deeper than that. Like Dorothy wrote, no, it's not therapy. And I think when we feel the power of the circle as facilitators, there's a temptation to run with it when that's not the proper use in that space. Lots of words, sorry.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And so it's, I suppose if you're teaching people to go out and be practitioners maybe in the world, you want to encourage reflective practice and sharing, but you also want people to manage their boundaries. So yeah, it's making sure that it's safe and that what people talk about is safe. And
Yes.
yeah. But you could ask a question in a group and people could bring up something, and again, how do you, how do you manage that? How do you manage that? But I think you'd manage it by the topic under discussion, I suppose. Yeah. Brenda, I like that. The opening and closing of it is so important.
I'll just jump in if I
Please.
can around the idea of therapy. I teach a broad range of students, grad students, and oftentimes I will have educators who are also studying counseling psychology or guidance. And I find that for those students, often the whole circle dialogue process is most difficult, or very difficult. I shouldn't say most, but very difficult, because they have been so trained to turn from being the facilitator to being the therapist. So we do actually, I call it out very early on that, as Brenda said, a circle has therapeutic outcomes, but it's the ability for the social, the gift of community, that there's therapeutic outcomes. But there are times when some of my students will say, well, this just feels like a therapy session. And I'm going like, whoa, no, let's talk about the distinction there. And so, and I'm reading more and more about that in different articles as well, that there are others, well, where circles end up getting co-opted. That I think that's a way that circles can get co-opted, when they turn into, when some people think that, well, they're a good substitute for therapy. No, they're not a good substitute for therapy. But let's talk about how a community can offer support to one another and how that's therapeutic, if people are feeling it's therapeutic.
Okay. If anyone says anything and they want to dispute how I've captured it, please do let me know. Just feel free to come in and say, no, don't write it like that, write it like that. I've kind of started jumping back and forth between them. Also, let me just say this, which I'm not, did you cover this, Lindsay, while I was gone, this part?
I didn't. No.
That's okay. So just for everyone who is here now, when we edit and produce this, we'd love to be able to have a slide that says, you know, all the contributors. So if you wanted to just take this opportunity to just write maybe your name, role, and institutional affiliation, if you have all of that in the chat, just in one line. And feel free not to as well, but anyone who would like to be named on this, who's contributing now, just put your in one line name, institutional affiliation, and role, and we can include you in this. Okay.
Ian, would you also be able to add, Fernanda had a great comment, and I think maybe to put in the caution space about healthy risk taking. And that, I think, to me, kind of resonates with something I think Annie was saying about, you know, just being aware of, one, just, you know, the time you have in a classroom setting often, but not posing a question or not creating the space if you don't have appropriate time, or if that's not the appropriate time ever. But if it's if you don't also provide that same sort of continuation of support, like, that's how I'm reading the healthy risk taking is, you know, the risk taking can be a benefit for that transformative experience and component, but needs to be done and sort of constructed in a healthy way.
Yeah, you can't be at the bottom of a pit as you leave the room, like, oh, sorry, time to go now. And everyone's like in the middle of feeling something. Good stuff.
Alana is bringing up in the chat here, you know, points around how to avoid conflating restorative justice and Indigenous ways of being. And I'm wondering if we could go to slide 3 and reflect a bit on this point and others. And I think this also kind of touches on the point Mara raised before she left, of like, how do we introduce this as something that's going to be a cornerstone of the classroom in a way that feels, I guess the word I want to use is like approachable and respectful. So I'd be curious to hear how people explain what is this thing that we're going to do together in class.
Well, for what it's worth, I'm going to put in the chat a PDF of my understanding the why, which is connected to my job of creating the Trojan horse to enter into school administrative offices and having a whole list of reasons why this is important, from social neuroscience to the study about the most powerful argument I have to students and to administrators is the United States Center for Disease Control put together a report on a study that was done of nearly 90,000 youth, and found that school connectedness was the #1 most strongest protective factor against all sorts of adverse behaviors. Like, it was a significant study. And so I pitch the circle as the quickest, most effective and efficient way to create those connections between students and between teachers and students, because relationship building with each student is a falsehood, just like safety is a falsehood. You can't tell me a high school teacher makes relationships with their 80 students equitably. So those are the two lenses I use the most. And I love that study. It's a very powerful piece of work for our work. Anyways, it's all in there. Take what you want. I don't know.
I've got it here.
I do a lot of pitching. You can tell.
It's interesting too. I'm noticing there's like a lot of why more than on the what. And I'm wondering, I'm like reflecting on my own use and realizing I think I tend to go for why and then just sit down and let's do it rather than giving any much explanation ahead of time.
I do too.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Why do you think that is for you, Lindsay?
I was just reflecting on that. I mean, I think I like words can't do justice is a little bit where I'm going, like just better to just feel it and then debrief it together and have people talk about what they just experienced as a way of understanding the what afterwards. But I'm curious how others navigate that.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone say something like, this is where we arrange the chairs in a circle and the right to speak goes around each person sequentially?
Yeah.
And we pass a thing to designate whose turn it is to speak and whose turn it is to listen.
Mm.
And if those words don't do justice to this question, right? Do those words do justice to this question or not?
They're a little part of it. You know, they're a part of explaining how the importance of everybody having the opportunity to speak and everybody having the choice to speak or not to speak or to offer silence. Yeah, and that everybody's voice is important and one voice is as important as the other. Yeah.
And Janine, do you want to come in on that?
Sure, I do. And I apologize for no picture. I'm recovering from surgery and I'm in bed. So I don't want you to see me. You know, one of the things in this question, I always tell people the whole secret of circles is getting people to the circle. And once they're in the circle, it will work. And I think the answer of why not explaining too much, and it's what I tell people, I am not a touchy-feely, let's kind of, you know, get to know each other and fall into each other's arm kind of person. That a lot of people that I'm gathering, including law students, but also professionals and others in the community, if I start describing what it is, they're going to head for the hills. And so, you know, I try to be as vague as I can as to what we're doing. I talk about a facilitated discussion or something, but I don't give much reason. And talking about, you know, be a respectful conversation. I mean, I use those kind of words, but I do not describe physically what's going to happen because I know I can't get them in the chairs. Once they're in the chairs, it'll work.
And Janine, do you describe it when they're in the chairs?
Yes, I do. I spend a lot of time and I really appreciate, you know, I do talk about the Indigenous history and that's, you know, we're not here to replicate it and talk about it, but it's actually about a half hour time that I spend with people talking about the importance to be respectful to each other, sort of some of the guidelines, but also the importance of listening, the importance of time, you know, some of the pragmatic matters that I don't have somebody at the early part of the circle leaving before the other people get to talk. And so all sorts of different things about those, but really it becomes about respectfully listening with your heart, and not having your brain filled with the monkey filling out all sorts of ideas. And I really try to set a quiet tone. And then obviously I have to be in that very quiet place. And so I talk about that a lot once they're in the chairs. And, you know, they're little things. I mean, we're not talking about those things, but they're little things that I do. Like I warn the person that I'm first going to hand the talking piece to in advance that I'm going to do that. And this is going to be the question so that they don't just absolutely freeze when the circle starts. And, you know, and I tell them if they want to pass it, that's fine. We come back to them and those kinds of things. You know, like mediations, every time something goes bad in a circle, my intro changes for the next one. About how I'm going to hopefully either prevent it or make it more comfortable. You know, as long as I'm talking, I want to say one other thing. We were talking before, I know it was a prior question, but you were talking before about bringing tough issues into a circle, particularly in a classroom. And I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I mean, I will ask a question about talking about an experience with, you know, an encounter with a stranger that was really wonderful. And I will have 3 women in the classroom talk about surviving sexual assault. I mean, it comes up in so many contexts, and it is a struggle of trying to manage it, worry about confidentiality and all the other things, particularly in a university setting. And so I think those are all issues that we really have to concentrate, particularly in this day and age of people talking more about their, you know, their traumas in their earlier lives.
One of the
Thank you.
things I love that you say, Janine, because I've been at some of your things, and one of the things I love, you know, is if there's 2 different types of communities there, that you make sure that one community doesn't try and say there's people in a prison and there's outside people in the prison, that you will say, you know, respond to the question like a person, not like somebody who's a helper or a teacher or an advocate.
Yeah, that's harder when you've got people who are either you know, you've brought in professionals from outside. I mean, I've done domestic violence related circles and have therapists there, and they want to turn into therapists in the middle of the circle. And I have to talk to them in advance about being just a human being that's participating in this experience and not try to fix everybody as they give their answers. I often tell them, you really want to know what the men are thinking rather than them feeding back to you what you wanted to hear. You know, and that all comes with doing a lot of those and finding out where the pitfalls are.
Lovely.
This discussion feels like a bridge to me to that how to design circle
To this one,
questions.
yeah.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah, so has been touched on a bit, right, in terms of how to have questions that invite choice in vulnerability. But curious to hear other strategies in this circle question design process.
I think the context is awfully important. You know, I'd have my 3 sort of phases: building community, talking about the main issues that you're here to talk about, and then, you know, how to move forward, nearly like, you know, but I think the context, yeah, what is it that you're actually trying to get out of it? The intention will really be related to the questions, I think.
I don't want to put you on the spot, Assad, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on one thing that was standing out to me after you spoke in thinking about how much you incorporated doing as a way to be in community with each other. And to me, it really was sort of to the point of inclusion and how you create a space, whether it's, you know, for some students who have language barriers or for other students who have other reasons that they are not comfortable verbally participating in the same way that they might physically or in other ways engage. I'm wondering what you think about how to design circle questions, or if there's a different way to phrase that. Does it need to be a question? Is there another way to think about how you design a circle activity for you know, thinking really intentionally about what inclusion means?
Thank you, Alana. I think the part that I really I guess a lot of what is the word, gratitude to Kay Brown is like, before hosting any circle, I see she will do some inner work, like even every circle, like she will take time, and then we'll go in like a kind of more in her own meditative mode. And this is like for example, in my circle here on campus, when I am doing with a specific Cree Nation, I guess specific intention for designing will be how the ceremonies and rituals are like. Obviously there will be folks in those circles where there will be that dissonance and disconnections and challenges. And for example, yesterday I had a class and then I was showing Krista Tippett and her TED talk on compassionate compassion. How do you deconstruct the word compassion? I had many students, they had real trigger because religiosity to them is something extremely triggering. And then the way she ended the TED talk was like a kind of more secularizing the word compassion. So I guess, I think, Catherine, you mentioned this context. Like, how do you have like those ceremonies and rituals? Even the word mindfulness has specific depth and connection to specific traditions and wisdom. And then how do you explicitly share and then mention and then also like even acknowledge that? I remember there was a discussion I had with some colleagues in University of Boston. They were mentioning when you use the word mindfulness and mention that this is a secular practice, that's the beginning of colonization. And that really, I'm still like a kind of remembering. And then when you think of yoga, you see one specific, if you even Google yoga in the Time magazine, you will see the picture of a specific ethnic group, a specific person taking a yoga pause. And is it delimiting or I guess completely detaching the historic root of yoga with Hindu traditions and their religion? So I guess in terms of designing, like how do, as a practitioner or as a facilitator, how do I pay that inner attention to those groups? And then, for example, if I'm hosting a circle with the Muslim community here in Saskatchewan, they have a specific way to do the opening circle. They do a specific recitation from a specific verse of the Quran. And so I will be paying attention to those. If I'm having a specific circle with our Sikh friends or Sikh community here, they have a specific way to do the opening circle. So at that attunement, I think that Annie mentioned, like how in terms of self-awareness and also awareness about those in the circle. And so challenge in academia is like you will have students from obviously all groups, and like myself in like yesterday's class, and then like compassion, Krista Tippett, she was mentioning so many work by so many religious scholars from Jewish, Muslim, and Christian traditions that contributed lots of trigger those who do not consider at all connected with any faith traditions. So I think that's but at the get-go, in terms of in Canadian context, we have lots of circles where you have an elder doing a specific ceremony. And I am noticing that there are some students who feeling that agitation because that may not be fully connecting to their worldviews and traditions and spiritual. So I think that's finding as much nuances and intuition as possible and attunement as possible, and then also explicitly mentioning that this is coming from those traditions, and that can contribute some disconnections. And I think Alana mentioned the word brave space. I think that if we, in the name of like ideal, like we will create safe space and then we completely forget even doing circle and doing anything, I think that that will do lots of disservice as well. So I think that's what Alana, in terms of inclusion, to me, this inner work before the circle, and then paying attention to the audience, and then how do I make it more socially, culturally, spiritually intuitive? I think that contributes extraordinary magic.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful response. There's a lot there.
Have I captured some or all of that in the right kind of places approximately? It's difficult, isn't it? Because even, even here, would it not be better for people if we helped them, instead of defining circle, if we what we're effectively we were doing on the slide was designing the explanation or description and the how and the why that a person will give to a group of people at the start of the circle. So I mean, we kind of, but I mean, that's also kind of what we're doing here, and then setting circle guidelines. But I mean, I wonder, you know, we almost approached this chronology in a bit of a research way, whereas maybe this would be more useful chronologically within the circle. Like instead of what is a circle, the first bit of the slides is like starting or before, opening, during, after. Would that be another way of grouping some of this?
Yeah, I love that you've asked that question, Ian, because I'm sitting here wondering about this disconnect between how I started in circles and how it felt so much. What Lindsay was mentioning about no one told me really what was going to happen, or I just went to a friend and friend invited me to a circle, and but it felt like coming home. I mean, there's a memory kind of in our bones about sitting in circle, and when it's too much over explained and ahead of time, it's really the power of the circle is quite lost, because our intellectual brain is like all engaged, and our really experiential embodiment, the soul, the spirit is put aside for us to try to understand what's happening and to think about what might happen to me and what will I say. Sitting in presence with each other is a remembering, and I'm wondering how this slideshow can articulate that or communicate that in a way, and maybe your idea of ordering it different or constructing it different might speak to that. I don't know.
That's interesting, right? Because is the issue that circles are different, or is the issue that circles are normal?
Good one.
Both. It's both in a way, isn't it? Because as Janine says, when you get people to the circle, say the first class, people are arriving to their first class of their course, and everybody's in a circle, they may not have been in a circle before. And yet by the end of that course, it'll be completely normal.
I mean, Bobby says here, and this is an interesting one, no one explains why a classroom is set up auditorium style. You know, we don't have these same expectations or you know, there are ways of doing things that don't have to continually justify themselves. And yet we're going into this, you know, are we assuming that we have to justify ourselves in order to do things this way?
I love that. It makes me think of, I had to go to the leadership of the college to promote my program. And I went to this big boardroom, and there's the chancellor and assistant chancellor always sitting there. And I pull out my talking piece and I just say, hey, so I'd just like to go around and hear how everyone's doing today. Just take this thing. And then when it's not your turn, and they're all staring at me, but they just all did it. And it became like the mythology of Annie O'Shaughnessy at St. Mike's. She's the one who made the chancellor use the talking piece. But to me, it was my own nervousness. I needed to know them more before I start pitching something so dear to me. So it just reminds me of that. Yeah, I love that idea. Like, since when do we justify sitting in an auditorium with all that? Oh my gosh.
And if they did, how would they describe why they do that?
Janine, did you want to come in on that?
I did. I just wanted to say, first of all, I was on the board of trustees and had them do it as well. And that's another group that if I told them I was going to do it, no one would have shown up, but it works. But you know, I had the funniest thing about a circle. I had a assistant a deputy U.S. attorney who had been sort of working on the side on some of our community work. And he said, well, I'd like to come to your circle. And I said, that's great. And he said, I'll just sit in the corner. I said, you don't get it. There are no corners in a circle. And it worked. I mean, he was really a big participator. But I tell you, in building construction and things, that our community has to be involved early when people are remodeling and redoing things, that we can create that classroom or that space, because it makes such a difference than having people in these, you know, these seats kind of turning and talking to each other, or even doing Lego projects. I mean, it really is very slow in coming in the academic world to have people in collaborative efforts, but it makes such a difference.
That's great. I like there are no corners. You know, there's something very aesthetic about that. Look, we've got 5 or 6 minutes left there. So just before we check out, I'm just going to go through these slides. Don't worry about reading everything that's on each of them, but just reflecting on what the titles currently say, and then also totally ignoring that and just thinking about whatever you want the titles to possibly say if it's different. Just, is there anything that you want me to put approximately in any of these places that's not already on there? And again, bearing in mind that the titles bear no relation to the text as currently stands and don't necessarily need to be retained in that way. But certainly if there's something you've been thinking but not saying. I'd love to hear just if I could take a minute on this one. You know, there's something really important here that is quite practical and is quite skill based, and almost, I don't want to say like an equation, but for a long time I was very bad at doing circle questions that people could parse or do anything with, whereas Terry O'Connell's the right conversation, and he gets to these really fundamental why is it so hard to something, and there's just something in that, something that's a skill set around designing a good question. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
One thing that's coming up for me is just I'm like, what's worked best? And I'm realizing it's giving up the role of coming up with the questions as soon as possible. So like I tend to do a little mini crash course on essential elements of facilitation in the first class, and then have students rotate doing opening circle for each class after that. And they come up with way better questions than I do.
I also think reflecting on the question and seeing what, actually testing it, what might people answer, because sometimes you will get, you think you're asking a particular question and you're not, it's actually, you're not asking the right question. And testing it, I think, with one or more people is really useful.
I think I went from asking really specific questions about the content and then thinking, okay, that's too prescriptive. And then I moved into a phase where I'd ask, what do you think of that? Or something which is maybe insufficiently prompting of insights. And it's like, where's that middle ground where you ask something that's not prescriptive, but the question itself can prompt possible insights?
I do think it's important too, when you're asking questions, that you really think, can everybody in this circle answer this question? Is it a question that's going to exclude some people? And I think that the answer to addressing that is, at least I tried to incorporate like 10 examples of different potential areas you may want to answer in the context of that question, so that it opens up for people. Because if I ask what impact has violence had in your life, and some people may live in a very rich area and never seen any real violence in front of them. So I can talk about things like, if you're afraid to live in a certain neighborhood, if your behaviors changed, and I try to give a list of, or you've actually experienced violence or seen violence, and give them sort of a litany of possibilities in the question so that everybody has something that they can answer to that question, even though it may be very different from someone else. So
That's really good, because I took a question from Lindsay, which is, tell us a story about your name. And I did a circle and everyone was like, oh, well, there is no story about my name. And then I went back to Lindsay. I was like, hey, your question didn't work. You used it. It worked great. I messed it up somehow. And you said, well, because you have to say, maybe maybe something to do with the time when this, or something to do with where it came. And then you give a bunch of examples of prompts, I suppose.
I think it's really important, because what it does is it frees people of where their immediate thought is, and opens up to their own experiences.
Thanks, Janine. Annie, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, there's something else that I find really important, that tends to meet two needs I have. One is, I want participants to trust that the circle will tell the story. So this is not to write notes about, but when there's one person and they have a lot to say, and they say a lot, and they're basically kind of speak, in the end, if they had trusted the circle, other people would have picked up other pieces, but they're like, you can tell they're trying to say every single point about your question as humanly possible. And what I find a good way to address that is to progressively lengthen questions. So I constrain them very closely, like one word that jumps out at you, elevate one word from this text that jumps out of you, and lightning round. And then one sentence that seems most impactful, lightning round. And now the insights. And they get to see how everyone is picking up different pieces, and it really is a we. But I do not ask those big open-ended questions until I've done that progressive, because I find that the talkers talk and the non-talkers don't. And so I try to, the equity of voice to me is so important. So, and the trust that the circle will actually create an answer together. Yeah.
That equity of voice, I don't know if it would go in this piece, but I also just wanted to raise in the chat, Dawn had a question that I just, I want to be conscious of time, but also think it's really an important point about, his question was about how you would use a circle for a student population of over 100. And to that, what you just said, Annie, I'm thinking about, how do we think about this in terms of the context of scale, and how much that impacts the format and the depth of how you can use circle. And yeah, I just wanted that to be included in some way as something to just think about.
Yeah.
In terms of
is there, what would it look like? So I guess I'm thinking about scale and the impact of that on how you structure, could you use it and do a lightning round versus could you use it and hear a personal story? And also knowing what you raised, Annie, and thinking about that some people, the step up, step back challenge is always kind of an interesting component.
Okay. Yeah, conscious of the time here. We're already a couple minutes over, so maybe I'll cut it off there. But maybe, I don't know, we've got to do something with this now. What I was going to say was I could circulate this this mess that I've made here and see if anyone wants to add to it. Or we could just take this and try and do something with it and circulate a draft would be another option. But maybe we'll talk off screen and see what we want to do here. Just finally to go around, and there's only a few people with us, so maybe we could do an audio check out. Just maybe take 10 or 15 seconds each, please, if that's okay, just conscious of the time, but to ask, what is one thing you learned or will take away from today? So one thing you learned or will take away from today, and I don't know if it's just because it's the most recent thing I heard or it's really good, but I like this idea. Start with the lightning round. One word that you took out of that, one sentence you took out of that, and then the insights flow from that. So that's something I'm taking away. Tim.
What I'm thinking is we tend to complicate a very simple thing. I'll pass on to Grazia.
Thanks, Tim. I think the feeling that we always learn. We always learn, and that reflecting together opens up unexpected possibilities. And I pass to Catherine.
Thanks, Grazia. Well, the word that Asad brought to us, joy and magic. You know, I just think that the joy of teaching and in teaching and of learning and in learning, you know. Yeah, so thanks for that. And I'll pass to Asad.
Thank you, Catherine. I think the word for me will be presence. That Annie, oh my goodness, when you were sharing, I deeply admire your presence into this circle. So thank you so much. And I will pass it to Alana.
I guess I'm the only one at this point. I want to thank both of you, Asad and Annie. I'm really sitting with a lot of that. And Annie in particular, I was thinking, I love that compassionate curiosity and the phrasing you use, thinking about working backwards, thinking about sort of what the outcome is and really working backwards as your starting point is pretty incredible and powerful. And I will pass to Monica.
Hi, I really just appreciated listening and soaking all this in. I'm just getting started in this. And so I just learned a ton. And I really appreciated all of the extra resources people shared in the chat. And I will pass to Anna. Is she gone yet?
Anna, can you hear? I know Anna was kind of half able to, so maybe go somewhere else.
So maybe Rowan?
Everybody. Hello.
Hey, Hannah.
Hello. Hi. I am listening all the time, but I have son with me, so I'm just waiting and listening. Yeah, so
bye. Bye.
Thanks, Anna. Who haven't we heard from? Don John?
I came in late. What I got is starting a cycle with an open-ended question. Seems very interesting to me. Thank you.
And Lindsay?
Yeah, I got so much from this session and just really grateful, but reinvigorated commitment to prioritizing mindfulness, joy, and play. And also grateful to Ian. That was a really impressive live organizing thing to capture all of what everyone was sharing.
Well, we haven't read it yet, so
I could tell it was good as it was happening.
And did we capture everyone there in the checkout as well?
How about Anne?
Annie?
Yeah.
Yep. No. I loved Tim's. He left us, but how our tendency towards complexity. And I heard just so much tonight to remind me from Dorothy and everyone about the simplicity of it, the power of the circle. And I just love that we've come together as in higher ed, and then we come to that. It just is really heartening and inspiring to hear that echo through this room, and the joy and the spirit and soul of this work present here. It hasn't higher ed hasn't, you know, suppressed us yet. It's very
Killed
lovely.
us, yes.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Annie, and thanks everyone for your fantastic contributions and participation today. I will maybe stop the recording there